In the beginning, God was a woman, and from her womb she created all that is. Thus, she is all things, and all things are her. These village goddesses seem to have been gradually transformed and consolidated into potent numerical groups, acquiring thereby a totally different character. Not individual, but in groups. It was Tantrism that elevated these local deities and gave them a new form and vigor as a group of goddesses who could bestow magical powers on their worshippers. But the cult seems to have broken down when the excesses practiced in the Yogini temples became repugnant to the general population. Well, this is again something debatable. What exactly was the excesses? And since there is no documentation, it's just hearsays. By the 17th and 18th centuries, memories of the cult were so completely wiped out that when the ruins of these temples were rediscovered, few clues remained as to the significance of the yoginis or the reasons for their worship. Namaskar and a very good afternoon to all of you present here. Revered chair of this session, Professor K.K. Basa, and all other eminent dignitaries. It is indeed a great moment for me to be sharing the dais with such luminaries. However, I know that I'll have to rush through this, and I promise that it'll be a short presentation. Basically, it'll probably be something where I would attempt to point out facts which would enable interest in your minds for reading up the concept further. And so I would like to introduce to you the yoginis, the Chauchat yoginis, understanding the divine feminine, and of course, we've been talking about the Itihasa sites and how do we unearth the tourism potential of these sites. So I'll keep on indicating to you and you can just change this. So we move on to the first, in which I think I can show you. The first slide is a picture of the very, very unique Chauchat Yogini temple at Hirapur, Odisha. I will go on to it later on, but then let's move on to the next slide, in which I would like to have, this is a quote which I really love. In the beginning, God was a woman, and from her womb she created all that is. Thus, she is all things, and all things are her. From the book Sacred Places of Goddess. And I thought this is very appropriate because we are talking about the divine feminine. We move on to the next, where we talk about the goddess concept as being viewed as omnipresent and omniscient in the sacred scapes of India. And when we are talking about Itihasa sites and identification of these destinations and developing the tourism potential, then we definitely consider this very important. The aim of worshipping the divine spirit, the acceptance and recognition of folk traditions by the great tradition, and the respectability of the feminine divine in the symbolic expression of identity, all these factors have shaped the human quest to worship goddess images in various forms and at different places. The local mythologies or the Sthala Puranas have been superimposed to justify their historicity and religious merit, and after time they consequently became part of the living tradition. So in this entire chain of existence, maintenance, continuity, the worship of goddesses is flourishing. The sacred scapes and ritual scapes of goddess, Shakti scapes as we would call it in several parts of India, of course, as you all know, is now being incorporated as an integral part of inclusive heritage development. We come to some pointers, after which I'll move on to the Yogini cult. That is, when we are talking about unearthing tourism potential of ancient India, the sacred sites of the ancient India, what are some of the major challenges that are thrown up? The first one would be identification of these ancient sites. And I'm talking about this in front of the leaders of ASI. So what I have done in our organization, Indian Institute of Tourism and Travel Management, is to inculcate this need in the minds of young people, the young students, where the tourism and heritage components come together, and a proper process of identification of the ancient sites. But what is even more important, and we've been discussing a whole lot of that in this session, is the right documentation, because a lot of history can be presented in a wrong way. I would be very careful about using the right word here in documentation. And in fact, in the age of social media, a whole lot of these sacred sites, documentation of the sacred sites is questionable. The second is excavation and exploration of ancient archaeological sites. And when we are talking about India, this can be a major problem because we have a problem of plenty here. If I take only Odisha from where I come, there are innumerable such sites there. Heritage tourism and promotion of sites. When the word tourism comes in, there are a lot of apprehensions about how it could negatively impact a sacred site. So we will also have to think about how we manage these sacred sites so that tourism may not impact the site negatively. Move on to the next. Strengthening conservation of the sites. But one thing I would like to mention is when we apply all this to the study of the Chauchat Yogini sites, a comprehensive historical narrative with seemingly diverse and completely scattered pieces of evidence, because Yogini temples are spread out all over the country, makes it nearly impossible to recognize them as belonging to a single puzzle. So this is a fundamental challenge that faces many students of ancient and medieval social Asian art and history. With this, we move on to the Yoginis. The Yoginis are a class of divine and semi-divine deities who emerged around 5th century AD and remained in worship till 13th century AD, after which their cult seems to have become extinct. I cannot go into all the different theories, but I will just mention few. The symptomatic characteristics that define the Yogini cult include tightly bound clans or groups, association with magic and occult, martial prowess, sexuality, and death. The Yogini cult, of course, is always in different numericals, but 64 Yoginis, because I am talking about the Chauchat Yoginis, was the expression of an extreme form of Tantricism in about 8th century AD, when the occult and esoteric sadhana reached the highest peak. The origin of the pantheon of 64 Yoginis is shrouded in mystery with a lot of theories regarding it. And the Vedic and post-Vedic literature do mention the names of some individual yoginis, but never 64 manifestations together. I will come to the ancient Puranas a bit later. As I was telling, that when we talk about the Yogini cult, we are also talking about Tantra. And both these traditions seem to be intertwined deeply in the rites and rituals, sound and magic, to rural and tribal traditions. There's a diverse range of attitudes towards these traditions, ranging from viewing it as a path to liberation to the relatively widespread associations of the tantric traditions with sorcery and sexuality. And when we are talking about tourism has done a lot indeed to contribute to the distortions of the concept as well. So we move on now. Because we will just do it quickly. Dahejia, Vidya Dahejia is a name which is very closely associated with the study of Chauchat Yoginis. In fact, hers was the most pioneering work in this subject. She says that these village goddesses seem to have been gradually transformed and consolidated into potent numerical groups, acquiring thereby a totally different character. Not individual, but in groups. It was Tantrism that elevated these local deities and gave them a new form and vigor as a group of goddesses who could bestow magical powers on their worshippers. But the cult seems to have broken down when the excesses practiced in the Yogini temples became repugnant to the general population. Well, this is again something debatable. What exactly was the excesses? And since there is no documentation, it's just hearsay. So a whole lot of that has been written in few of my books on the Yoginis. By the 17th and 18th centuries, memories of the cult were so completely wiped out that when the ruins of these temples were rediscovered, few clues remained as to the significance of the Yoginis or the reasons for their worship. In fact, I must tell you that the Hirapur temple has been relatively unknown till recently. When it has come to the limelight, despite research being done by a number of Westerners and Indian scholars as well. But the reason as to how Hirapur as a village, the temple was in the middle of the village and people were not going to the village. This is something which comes through that the fear of the Tantra kept people away. And today, Hirapur lies in close proximity to the capital of Odisha, which is Bhubaneswar. People are no longer scared. And Mahamaya has been picked out among all the yoginis as one of the yoginis who is closest to the Hindu pantheon, and so it is more or less a Hindu temple right now. We'll run through some of the pictures now. Yeah, before that, I would just like to quickly mention that in India, we have a number of existing as well as lost Yogini temples. Among the existing Yogini temples, we have Hirapur. In Odisha, we have two rare temples, Hirapur in Khurda and Ranipur Jharial in Bolangir. And when I will come later on to the tourism aspects, I will tell you which are the tourists who come here. We have Bhedaghat, Khajuraho, Mitauli, Morena, Bado, Dudahi in Madhya Pradesh. The lost Yogini temples, where most of the statues are now in different museums, either in India or abroad, are Lokha, Shahdol, Hinjalgarh, Nareshwar in Madhya Pradesh, Varanasi, Rikhya in Uttar Pradesh, Mehrauli in Delhi, Kaveri Pakam in Tamil Nadu, and a little bit of research has been done on each of them. The first picture that I'm showing you here is the hilltop, the Mitauli Chauchat Yogini temple. I think in all the temples, excepting the Chauchat Yogini temple at Khajuraho, you'll notice a unique feature is the hepathril open temples, which is open to the sky, and there's a very nice interpretation regarding it as well. But this has been said to inspire the Parliament building. Well, we do not know about the real, authenticity of the fact, but this has now definitely been circulated. Another very interesting part of this temple is none of the statues are now there in that temple. The only temple where all the statues are more or less intact is the Yogini temple at Hirapur, where you can see the statues are all miniature. And as we move on, this is the frontage. You can see what a small temple it is. So when we met the Department of Tourism and requested them to put this in the tourism map, they said that this is a very small destination. It does not really have a retention quality. How much time does one take? Half an hour probably. So we have to develop design the destination in such a manner that it can retain the tourists more, or tourist is not a good word here. I will use traveler. Some of these aspects I would like to mention. These are typical to Hirapur, but these are found in all Chauchat Yogini temples. Is the Yoginis have a lot of crematoria iconography, where they are depicted as standing on a corpse or carrying and drinking from a skull cap. And the gnomes, there are a lot of Yoginis in war mode, like Agni, Chamunda, Bhaluka, etc. And of course, the central deity is Mahamaya, whom I told already right now. She is the presiding deity. This is Mahamaya. We move on to the next. Again, the kind of puja that is being done right now. One very interesting aspect of some of these temples, and especially Hirapur, is that none of the goddesses here are presented as spouses. They are independent goddesses, and you have female manifestations of the male goddesses. So you can see Vinayaki as part of the 64 yoginis of the Matrika goddesses, and she is Ganesha, otherwise called as Ganesha, and the iconography is quite clear here. We did speak a bit about empowerment in the beginning. I think Madam Neera Mishra in her introductory speech did talk about this. So here we come across women who are fascinating in the sense that in their original mythological context, they might have been confined to the roles of consorts, attendant deities, and here in the Yogini cult, they have transformed into individual deities, and sometimes maybe the aggressiveness or ferociousness is to portray them as empowered women, and there are a lot of interpretations regarding this. I'll give you one example here. The Yogini Saraswati, who has the body of a female, carries a veena, but is mustached as well and can be seen twirling her mustache. So the Ardhanarishwar concept, if we can just liken it, you see half of the body is man and half is woman. So the concept behind it, there was a very interesting article I had read as to what is the psychology of the craftsmen who do these statues, What thought did they have? Were they trying to portray that there are feminine and masculine qualities residing in a woman? Something like that. And there are a lot of theories would say that yoginis were women and then they were deified, etc. This is the other very rare temple at Ranipur Jharial, Balangir. Even people in Orissa cannot travel all the distance to visit it, but it is a rare temple. There have been a lot of theories regarding the complete destruction of some of these photographers now. I'll come to that later on. They are traveling to these spots. They use this at night, particularly to take the pictures, and it appears, very, very nice. This is a photograph which won the award of the Department of Tourism, Government of Odisha. These are the statues, as you can see. Most of them are beak. You can see a statue with a beak and the central Shiva statue. And you can see a blue frame outside the statues. So here there was a very interesting, theory. Anything that breaks in any temple is due to pilferage and looting, etc. But no, there are also some theories which say that these were tribal goddesses because of the features. But actually the features are very sharp and they have been effaced over time because this particular temple has statues made of sandstone and it is very much subject to wear and tear. Unlike other temples which, are there in other Chauchat Yogini temples. Here we move on to the mention of the yoginis in the ancient texts. And the earliest known ancient Hindu text that contains lists of the 64 yoginis is the Agni Purana, compiled in its present form sometime in the 9th century. The 52nd chapter, Attributes of the Goddesses, names the 64 yoginis and briefly describes them, indicating the images of the yoginis were already being carved by then. When we come to the Chauchat yoginis of Hirapur, they have been identified based on their iconographical features by the Orissa scholar Sarala Das's 16th century text Chandi Purana. The other ancient texts that have made mention of the yoginis are the Skanda Purana, Agni Purana, Katha Sarita Sagar, Malati Madhav, Raj Tarangini, Uttama Chitra Kathanka, etc., where it is mentioned in the context of the yoginis that these are people who have magical powers to turn humans into birds or animals, and the ability they have to fly into air. And yoginis have always been spoken about as the pioneers of shape-shifting, that they could change their shapes. The early tantric treatises also on yogini lakshana, or the characteristics of yoginis, have mentioned about the iconographical features of yoginis. At least 4 ancient Hindu texts dated between 9th to 13th century mention the power of the yoginis. The Chaturvarga Chintamani, 13th century, Pratishta Lakshan Sar Samuchaya, Mattotara Tantra, 13th century, Maya Dipika, about which much reference is not available right now. So yoginis are also referred to in the Puranas, in Shaivite stories, Shakti stories, explaining their roles in the social deity hierarchy. Let's come to the present context now, and I'm nearing the end of my talk. How is it relevant to the young generation today, and how do we say that we are trying to unearth the tourism potential of these places? There is a lot of significance of the Chauchat yoginis among modern women as liberated goddesses who had their own stance in society despite prescribed social sanctions. So I have conducted a number of research studies in this area with my students. I have 3 scholars who are doing their PhD under me. And we had a very interesting study where we found that among the travelers, at least 60% of the travelers were women. And I think most of you are aware today that there's a very significant trend of solo travel. And most of these women travelers were undertaking tours, as I have written here. I'll mention the name of an organization, the Sacred Mystical Journeys, which has designed a women-only goddess tour led by a special female guide who works with the sacred feminine and goddess sites. This is in Ireland, but today we have a lot of examples of that, even in a place like Orissa. And the fact is that these people are not coming for the standard consumption of a tourist. They are coming for authenticity, for an authentic experience. They want documentation. They would like to read more about the concept, and they would like to, spend more time in the temple premises. So these are the motivators. The study indicated these factors, that people come for experiencing local culture, for spending leisure time in the temple premises, for heritage and cultural attributes. They have an interest in history, archaeology, tantric and yogini cult, an escape from the daily routine, and to have an opportunity for self-reflection, which has taken the shape of a very strong trend called identity tourism, and of course rural tourism, and an interest in religion and philosophy. I would like to wind up by saying that there are a lot of people who come to these sites who are art historians. They would like to study the animal-headed anthropomorphic yogini figures. And there are a lot of people who belong to the New Age spirituality frame who also would like to come in there, because this is a very different kind of an approach. And we have today, there is a very significant trend which is going away from mass tourism, and these are the niche travelers. The niche travelers go for their own desire. So when we have a context like this, I think the time is absolutely relevant to realize the significance of these lesser-known destinations, this cult of the Chauchat yoginis, and to devise a product which is understood and significant to the younger generation. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.